Just kidding. So Joel's pushing his chair back. Okay, so tonight is noise, and again, I'm a noise geek. I love noise stuff. There are people that are way geekier than I am with noise. We had a person at the engineering firm where I worked where they basically all they did their whole career was design noise barriers. There's all kinds of walls along highways, and the notion behind those walls is to absorb the noise of the highway so that you can continue to have residential structures on the other side, or schools, or whatever it is that's on the other side of those noise walls. In Florida, they're really quite common. So they'll put these large noise walls, and then they'll build condominiums or apartments right on the other side of them. And I mean, I assume that it helps some, but there are people that can tell you exactly how much it helps. And so this is a real field of study. And if you go into a planning position, this can be one that if you like this stuff, it can be entertaining. I mean, you can spend your whole life with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the day-night noise level, and I'm going to put up some videos for you that they're getting a little older. We do have a little better technology and modeling to calculate these things, but ordinarily the day-night level that we're concerned with is 65 decibels. 65 decibels. Anything under 65 decibels is almost unnoticeable. It's just background noise. And there are all kinds of tables and charts that can show you a whole variety. Of impacts of those, of the items, whether it's a 737 and what series generation engine that it has on it, to lawnmowers, to if you go to the Chiefs games, they broke the world record of being at 134 decibels of human-made noise in an outdoor stadium. So the noise levels, the concept is that at 65, we begin to notice some disruption. We use a different calculation for night levels than we do day, and there's a good reason behind that. Anyone?
Sleep.
That's it. Sleep disturbance. And so any incident that occurs at night has a little bit more of a multiplier than those that occur during the day. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop open this screen, and we're going to watch this video because it's pretty cool.
The following video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft noise metric, day-night average sound level, also known as DNL. As the video begins, aircraft are shown flying arrival and departure procedures to and from a major airport in high speed. Green and red trails behind the aircraft show the travel paths of arrivals and departures, respectively. Each arriving or departing aircraft is continuously transferring energy to the ground in the form of noise. The louder and lower the aircraft, the more noise energy it produces on the ground. The size of the multicolored bubbles surrounding each aircraft correspond to how much noise energy is being transferred to the ground at any given moment. The essence of DNL and all other cumulative noise metrics is to represent the total accumulation of aircraft noise energy over some period of time. If we focus on the pink bullseye on the map, each passing flight transfers some total amount of noise energy to the ground at that location. As the flights pass, the graph on the left shows aircraft noise energy accumulating at that point. The flights that come nearest to the pink bullseye tend to transfer the most noise energy to that location. Over the course of a day, a great deal of aircraft noise energy may accumulate. DNL is different from many cumulative metrics in that it puts an extra emphasis on nighttime flights. Nighttime flights are defined as those happening between 10 o'clock p.m. and 7 o'clock a.m. To account for the extra sensitivity many people have to nighttime flights, the calculation of DNL multiplies the actual noise energy transferred from these flights by 10. In other words, a flight at night counts 10 times as much in the calculation of DNL as a similar flight in the day. This is referred to as the DNL nighttime penalty. At the end of a full 24-hour period, the DNL value can be calculated. To calculate DNL, all the accumulated noise energy from the daytime and the nighttime is added together, including the influence of the nighttime penalty. The total noise energy from the day and the night is then distributed evenly over the entire 24-hour period. With the aircraft noise energy distributed evenly, the result is a single continuous noise level in decibels. This level is the DNL.
And so what we're looking for is we're looking for a DNL of less than 65 or 65. Anything higher than that, then we usually try and take mitigation steps for. There's really something interesting that happened the last few years in terms of day-night level and noise exposure, and it was unexpected. So let's see if I can let me see if I can get back to the module for the class. Does anybody have a guess what might have happened in the last few years that might have changed how how noise is occurring around airports?
Just more planes flying around?
Actually, no. It's roughly the same number of planes in the same number of planes in the area. I'm trying to do two things at once here. Let me
Is it like the buildings?
No, it's not buildings. It's something that you've probably talked about in either other classes or just thinking about things that have happened here in the last few years.
Drones.
Nope, not drones. Whoops. Let's see if I can get one that actually has the right title here. Let's go back one. So what are the big things that have happened in terms of navigation in the last few years?
GPS.
GPS, that's right. And so with the GPS, what happens with GPS and GPS navigation?
It's just put on planes more now, so
It what?
there's just more of them on planes now, other than the LCD gauges.
There are more. So part of what happens is that, so like for instance, the Washington area airports, this is, the number of complaints have skyrocketed. And so the question is why? What's so different about how navigation is working now? Well, the answer is something that we thought was going to solve problems is actually created a little bit of a problem itself. And that is the use of next gen. So the creation of of satellite-based navigation, changing from radar-based navigation, puts a lot of the jets over the exact same path. Before, when you're using radio-controlled or radar-vectored flight paths, you had to put a fair amount of separation because you didn't have the exact position reporting. You were looking at a blip on a screen and you were basically guessing. Now, because the aircraft can put in the exact path along two waypoints on a GPS line, you suddenly have the aircraft flying the exact same route, which means that, you moving that aircraft a quarter of a mile, a half a mile away would have changed the noise contour. Instead, you're having every single plane fly right over the same spot. And it's precise. And it's frequently at exactly the same altitudes each time. So where this was, you had a little bit of variation to it. You had a little bit of difference in your noise contours. And if you think about how the air works, it's fluid dynamics, right? It propagates waves based on known inputs. That's how air works. It's just like water. Well, you put a ripple in the water, and that ripples out, and so you have some distribution of that noise. If you throw a rock into that same spot over and over and over again, it changes the way the ripple works. So your noise propagation follows roughly the same path every time. So it's the same people who complain over and over again. Plus, with the GPS tracking, and with the jets operating based on the GPS, based on an autopilot, you're able to increase capacity. So you can use the same route over and over and over again, whereas before you might have set up different routes in order to relieve your congestion. But because you have known factors, you can basically change the spacing. You're getting more done in a smaller space. The only problem is that smaller space is getting hit by that wave over and over and over again. In fact, when they first put performance routes across the Atlantic, they had to start stepping aircraft out of the route because they were hitting wake turbulence from the aircraft right ahead of them. Even though there was proper separation, they were flying such an exact same route that you were having air disturbance in spite of the fact that, you know, they were at a distance that we would have ordinarily said we don't expect there to be that kind of an issue. And so next gen, where we thought it was going to solve a whole bunch of problems, especially the direct routing system, it ends up actually creating issues. And so this article in particular, this one's from Washington, D.C. There's another one in the modules. There's another one from, this one is next gen noise. This one is from neighborhoods in New York. Oh, I didn't hit the share button, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, this is actually Phoenix. And so what we're seeing happen is that the routes are actually creating issues as opposed to reducing the issues. And you're putting more, because you're putting more aircraft into a smaller area. Now, people are so creative. This is what I love about the human spirit. People are so creative that they actually came up with an app that allows you to complain to the local airport just by pushing a button. I call it the noise button. Let me share that one with you. Maybe they call it the noise button. So basically what the people that are in areas where they're complaining about noise, all they've got to do is hit the clicker to complain about that aircraft flying overhead. And it's funny because this gal talks about how clicking the button is really psychologically satisfactory. So in other words, what she's got going there is that, you know, she wants to have somebody listen to her about the noise, so she just sits there and she clicks the button. Well, so in August, I think this is from last year. Yeah, it's from 2018, so 2 years ago. In August, year over year, the number of complaints increased at one of these airports. Let's see. So there are 35,000 complaints in 30 days. 35,000 noise complaints in 30 days. One of these other airports, it talks about how, maybe it's BWI there, or it's it's one of the airports in San Diego area, but it talks about year over year, the number of complaints is increased by over 100,000. So, okay. So think about that for just a second. You're the airport manager, and this new tool comes online where anybody who feels like it can just click the button and all of a sudden it generates a noise complaint for the airport. One of the things the app does is it actually calculates which aircraft may potentially be making the noise. But what you could do is you could sit there and you could wait until the aircraft is over your house and click the button whether or not you were disturbed or not. And I know you all are thinking, why would people do that? I mean, nobody would really do that, would they? Also, if we go back to the modules again, there's a 2016 study that was done, and this one absolutely kills me. Oops, that's Europe. There was a 2016 study. Where are we at? Here it is. And you guys can judge this one for yourselves just by the title of the article. Basically, what was happening there is that a very, very few people were the ones generating most of the complaints. This study was done. So here are some of the highlights of the study. So one individual in Monterey Park, California, near Los Angeles, made 589 calls about noise in June alone. 3 callers made up 88% of the complaints about LAX. Just three callers. 2 individuals at one residence made 78% of the complaints about Washington and Denver. 1 person who lived 30 miles from the airport made 73% of the complaints. And you go, okay, well, how many is that in real numbers? And it actually provides some numbers out of the Salt Lake area where 1 nursing home had generated over 15,000 noise complaints. One nursing home, and probably only 1 or 2 people. So here you are. You're the airport manager at a big airport. I mean, so someplace providing commercial service, although it doesn't have to be a big airport. I have an article in the modules for you about Centennial in Denver. You know, it's the GA airport. I think it's on the side of town. They're having noise complaints. So here you are, you're the airport manager, and somehow you're supposed to make a good faith effort to work through these noise complaints. Here's the Centennial article. Is it still sharing? Can you see the Denver article?
Mhm.
And then there's another article on DIA. If you're looking for a topic still, because it has to be turned in tonight, noise isn't a bad one, and you got a ton of articles already in your modules. So here's the DIA noise. When Adams County either sold or gave DIA a bunch of land when they started talking about putting the airport there, I don't know, 30 years ago. This is a long time ago. So they sold them a bunch of land, and there were some conditions in it. And one of the conditions is that there would be a mechanism for reporting noise complaints, and, you know, that there would also be a reporting system for what the noise levels were. And so Adams County has now decided that they're not really fans of DIA. And so they've sued them for $33 million. This is actually, I think, this January. Yeah, no, this was September of 2019, but I think it went to court in January, the initial hearing. So they're suing them because they think that they violated the terms of the original agreement. Okay, you're the airport manager. There are a couple things working here, right? So you establish this really cool system because under Part 159, you get to not 159. Yeah, maybe it is 159. It's not 157. 157 is unregistered airports. So it's 159. So under Part 159, you're eligible for a bunch of money as long as you're doing programs to mitigate noise issues. And so you put your plan into place. You have a 65 dB level that extends out away from the airport. You maybe have target areas like you saw in that video where there was a target a little bit away from San Francisco. So you put your 159 plan into place. You establish this really cool system on the internet that lets people report their noise issues. And then somebody creates a clicker. It's like a garage door opener. I mean, you kind of wonder if you click it like 5 times fast, if it registers 5 noise complaints. So all of a sudden you have a bunch of data and you can't trust its reliability, right? Was that actually a noise complaint, or was that somebody who was clicking their clicker despite the fact that DIA actually exists? And if you have any doubt at all that some people do, they don't like the fact that airports exist. If you have any doubt about that, it doesn't take much to look at a Meigs Field example, or a Santa Monica, or a what's the other one in California? It's not Burbank, although Burbank has some funny signs. If you ever fly into Burbank, take a look at the fly-friendly signs. Those are just hilarious to me. What does fly-friendly mean? Well, it means that there's some noise abatement in place and that you're supposed to follow that noise abatement. So anytime you see that sign, you say, okay, I've got to do something. Okay, so we're back to this thing. You're the airport manager. What exactly do you do in order to satisfy people that you're taking noise complaints seriously, and you don't really have much, there are not many options for you, right? Any ideas? What do we do? What do we do?
Get a good group of people and hand deliver earplugs to those people.
Oh gosh, I think I told you guys already that a few years ago, all of the money in the central region was going to St. Louis to noise-proof houses. It was like, really? Well, so I'm not sure if this is going to show up or not. So this is what Chicago did at one point. Can you all see this?
No.
Okay, let me switch back to it. All right, so does that remind anybody of that 1980s classic film Stripes? We have a tactical RV. Anyhow, so what they did is they created this noise outreach vehicle. And of course, the purpose is to take it out to community fairs and book drives and apparently food truck festivals. Of course, you know, if you walked up to this thing and you ordered a couple of tacos, you'd be disappointed. But so they took this thing out to the community and they talked about noise. And it turns out one of the things that when the researchers who did the community, the managing expectations of noise, that ACRP 15, one of the things they found out is that most of the time what people really wanted when they had a hearing about noise is they wanted someone to listen to them. I'm not sure if that's ironic or not. I mean, so they just wanted to make a little noise and have people recognize that they had a point. And I think that's actually a very valid message that comes out of this research in general, is that they don't want somebody to show up in a truck or van or whatever this is and tell them how it is and whether or not they're disturbed by the noise. They just want somebody to show up and listen. And so you take your community outreach vehicle and you sit in a neighborhood and you have a neighborhood barbecue and you decide for yourselves whether or not the noise is the issue or not. Have any of you all seen that the movie 1-6 Left or 1-6 Right? AOPA produced it. It's a good movie. One of the things that they address in that is that the neighborhoods basically encroached upon the airport. The airports were frequently there in the 1940s and 1950s. You know, they were developed around the defense industry, around World War II, a number of them. And they were in the middle of nowhere, and then the neighborhood grew to them. And so how do you exactly expect the neighborhood to handle noise issues when the airport was noisy to begin with and the neighborhood became sensitive to it? And the answer is that it's difficult. It is cotton picking difficult. And so what we'll do is we'll do noise studies. We'll look at the research and so forth. But at the end of the day, noise is noise. And part of the reason that people fear airport noise is because if an airplane can be heard, it can land on them. That is the perception. That perception is not reality, except for it is. You know, you can hear the airplane, and therefore it poses a threat. And while they might not be concerned about a motorcycle that goes by and actually produces more decibels, they're concerned about the airplane because they hear it longer because of the way that sound propagates. As soon as that motorcycle is by, the sound propagation ends, or as soon as it moves next to the sound producing wall or the tree or the grass or the houses or whatever is there, it's absorbed. When the aircraft passes overhead, that noise is not absorbed. It remains with them until the
following video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft
until the aircraft is further away from the hearer, the person who's concerned about the noise. Okay, so the next one we're gonna talk about, and this is especially important when you're doing master planning, is time above. So one of the things we thought was going to happen with next gen is we were going to be able to develop our flight paths so that we could reduce our time above. And we can put targets in it. But again, like I said, next gen has actually put us in a position where we're actually seeing more of this time above. We're seeing such exact paths, exact descents that that the cumulative noise levels are actually higher. So let's take a listen to this one. If she'll let me. Oh, can you guys see the transportation research one? No. Don't everybody yell out at once. No, we can't see it. Now we can. Okay, here we go. This is time above.
The following video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft noise metric time above, also known as TA. On the right, 3 separate aircraft will be shown consecutively taking off and beginning their flights. The multicolored bubbles surrounding the aircraft as they travel will represent the intensity of the sound which reaches the ground in all directions. For an observer standing at the pink bullseye, the approximate sound events will be played through your speakers. The sound level for this observer will also be graphed on the left with a moving bar representing the current moment in time. The time above noise metric is commonly referred to as TA. In this example, the threshold is 65 decibels. This is referred to as time above 65 or TA 65. During a 24-hour day, the defined metric of TA 65 is the total amount of time, typically in seconds or minutes, during which aircraft noise exceeds the noise level threshold. In this example, the 3 noise events exceeded 65 decibels for 20 seconds, 3 seconds, and 12 seconds respectively, for a total time above 65 of 35 seconds.
Okay, so what's happening there? Why? So if we pop back here, maybe she'll let me do it.
The following
Nope.
video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft.
Okay, so why was there different TA
The following
levels?
video sequence will
I mean, so what do we have going on here? What explains why the first aircraft ended up at about 77, and then the third aircraft was really only about 75? What's going on there? What are we seeing in terms of things that we need to think about for our master plan?
Are they the same aircraft?
No, they're not. That's one of the first considerations, right? So they're not the same aircraft. So in terms of when we're looking at the performance chart and we're looking at our noise, what are the considerations that we need to keep in mind? So what else is going on there? It's not the same aircraft, and therefore there are a couple of more things that happen as variables because it's not the same aircraft. So what are those couple of other things? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Like some are just faster, some fly better, like that, or?
Okay, so what constitutes, so you're on the right track. So what constitutes those things? So when is an aircraft the noisiest?
When it's climbing and at low altitude.
Low, slow, and dirty, right? So when is it low, slow, and dirty and maximum thrust? So on landing, usually your thrust is retarded, so you don't have as much of that noise issue. But on takeoff, you have an aircraft that is low, slow, and it's dirty. It's got some degree of flaps put in order to take off. So what can we do to reduce some of those factors so that at our bullseye spot, aircraft are less noisy? What are things that we can do?
Climb faster.
Climb faster. And so how do you climb faster? What would be something that can happen that the FAA can do? Not so much us as airport managers, but what can the FAA do in order to get those aircraft to climb faster? Improve the engines, right? And so we've gone first gen, second gen, third gen. We're on third gen and a half for engines. So the aircraft that are flying into our airports, we really cannot control what type of engines they use or what generation of jets they are. But we can encourage our partners in the airlines to adopt the technology faster. Allegiant Airline just retired their last MD-80. That is a loud, noisy, oil-burning beast. Getting that out of the fleet is simply going to help everyone. They were having a hard time finding parts anyhow, and that's why Allegiant used to break down so much. Did anybody ever fly Allegiant? None of you guys ever flown Allegiant? It's an experience. They used to fly the casino flights. So what they would do is they'd round up a bunch of people, and they'd totally fill a casino flight, and they would. So I don't know if Salina ever did it, but I know Garden City did. So they'd get 200 people, and they'd fly in one of these old MD-80s, and they'd completely fill the plane. And to be on that flight, you also had to have your room, and your transportation and your meals would all be covered. But so it was a package, and and heck, Garden City in January, I'd pay for that. Anyhow, they would keep flying those old planes and completely packed, and it was an interesting business model. And then they started flying the economy routes all around, and so they finally retired that old fleet. It's all a new fleet now, and so that's quieter. So encouraging our partners can be helpful. What's something infrastructure-wise we could do at the airport that would actually make that time above less? So we fix the plane. What can we fix on the airport?
Like make it a longer runway.
Yeah. And it's not a criteria that the FAA uses to increase the length of your runway, but it is absolutely a fact that if you make that runway longer, and even if you only make it longer in terms of available takeoff distance, you will have that flight being higher at that point that it crosses. Now, there's a whole lot of calculations you got to do to figure out what's actually going to produce a good positive change for you. If you look at this map, this is just fascinating to me, one of the ones that they used, because this terrain is not conducive to absorbing the sound energy. If anything, it almost looks like it's an echo chamber, right? Because you have mountains on the sides. It is hard-packed terrain without vegetation. There's nothing about this map, this area, that absorbs sound until you get to the houses. See that little section of houses up there at the top? So all of a sudden, you've got a bunch of places that'll absorb sound. The other thing that's a real problem with where this particular airport is that we're looking at an area where it doesn't look like the terrain would permit you to turn early. I mean, ideally in a situation like this, you would turn out as soon as you possibly could so that you avoid those noise contours over the top of houses. There are other things we can do, though, so we don't have to be frustrated just by the fact that we're in a really difficult area to mitigate. We can actually do something that looks like this. Oh, my screen popped back to the Scooby-Doo van. It's not a Scooby-Doo van. It's a food truck. Okay. So we can do this. So this is an aircraft noise overlay district. What is an aircraft noise overlay district? Well, the zoning in Orlando and in Florida permitted them to establish this district that said, you know what? We really don't want residential applications in the area around the airport, because we know eventually what's going to happen is that we're going to fight we're gonna, is this screen visible at all?
Yes.
Okay. So if you look in this, can you see my hand? Can you see the little hand thing? Can you see the little pointer?
Yes.
Okay. So that's Orlando Exec. This is MCO. This is Orlando International. So if you look at this, these are the direct noise contours. This is the area where we expect the most noise to be generated. Guess what's there? Runways. Okay. And then what we have is we have the area that extends out on the center line out to a fair distance. And then we have our historical turning patterns. And in fact, if you look at, this one doesn't have it's not as defined, but if coming over from Lakeland, which is where I am off the VOR, whenever there's storms in Orlando, what they'll do is they'll send the aircraft over here to the Lakeland VOR and either take the VOR over and in or have them rotate there. So anyhow, this area is basically what it's protecting is it's protecting the approaches into Orlando. And then the overlay district says that you may be required to take additional precautions to reduce the threat of noise. You may not be able to build what you want to build on your land because of noise. And there have been a number of cases over the years, and for the most part, this is not considered a taking by the government. In other words, just because you can't build what you want to build doesn't mean that the government has stopped you from having useful value in your land and therefore have to pay you, except for in Nevada and Minnesota. In Nevada, there's a McCarran case, and it's a pain in the butt because basically what it said is anybody who wanted to build a 400-foot tall casino should be compensated for everything above the 22nd floor if that's where your glide slope would have cut through. But every other state in the country, well, every other state that's decided on it, so the majority opinion is that this is not a taking. This is done to protect the public interest. What is the public interest? The public interest is both in the airport and being able to have air travel and in the health and safety of the community so that they don't have sleep disruption and so forth. So in this section here, you may be able to do industrial. So you haven't lost the use of your property, but you may only be able to do industrial. This section out here, you may be able to do residential, but it's not going to be high density residential so that it affects a whole ton of people. And you'll notice that there are areas that are already developed, and functionally what happens there is that you put up with what's there, and if that thing ever stops being what it is now, then it can't go to anything that would be prohibited in this zone. So in other words, if high density residential is prohibited in this zone and you have an apartment complex and the apartment complex for whatever reason burns down, is demolished, whatever, loses half of its usability, then you cannot rebuild that particular item. So having these, and you'll notice the contours that they followed, it's pretty, this stuff starts to make sense, right? So zone A, that place we're not putting anything, basically, we're industrial probably, and things related to the airport are in that 75 or greater DNL level. Zone B, 70 to 75, so we're not putting much in there. 65 to 70, a little more stuff. Once we're in zone D, it's okay. We are going to have times where it's louder, and so what we're going to do is we're going to require folks to put in land use restrictions. Those land use controls would say something to the effect of, I know the airport's there, I'm not going to complain about it. Or if you're going to have new building in that area, what it will do is so you'll waive the claim. So you can't claim that the airport's creating problems for you. You have to notify everybody who buys after you, and you can also usually put in some sort of noise dampening or reducing infrastructure, insulation, and any variety of things that would help you cut down the amount of noise. Now, the interesting part to me in real life, so you're in Concordia, Kansas. When the FAA makes a rule, they make a rule for everybody because that's just kind of the way it works. So they're trying to establish a rule. And so how do they figure out the rule? Well, this rule works for Orlando or wherever. So we just apply that as the rule in general. So when Concordia wanted to put their hospital right next to the airport, the FAA said no, because there would be a potential for noise disruption. Except, y'all been to Concordia, right? What are the chances that the airport noise there is going to disrupt you any more than the highway that runs right out there? Yeah, not very good. And so putting the hospital at the airport made good sense to them because they frequently have air evacuation of patients. And so they wanted a taxiway straight off of the airport runway right into the hospital, but they had to work through all of the FAA's noise regulations in order to get there from here. I don't think they've been successful. They had been working at that for several years before I left, and so I'm guessing they probably are still either they didn't have the demand for the hospital or they simply couldn't get past the regulations in the way that it worked. But ordinarily it's considered incompatible to have a hospital that close to an airport. Well, sometimes you got to be realistic about these things, and that was not very realistic. Okay, so let's look at a couple of these other levels. So the next one, let's see if I can share again without turning off the whole thing. There it is. Okay.
The following video sequence.
Oops. I've seen that one. Whoops.
The following video sequence.
Apparently, I'm just going to keep hitting the same.
Above, also known as TA.
I'm just going to keep hitting the same video until you guys tell me to stop. All right, let's try this other one. So this next one is maximum noise level, and then we'll go to.
Video sequence will demonstrate.
Then we'll go to number of events, and then we'll do sound exposure.
Following video sequence will demonstrate the following video sequence.
She's really bound and determined to say.
The following video sequence will demonstrate.
All right, so let's go to maximum noise level. The
following video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft noise metric maximum noise level, also known as LMAX. On the right, an aircraft will be shown taking off and beginning its flight. The multicolored bubbles surrounding the aircraft as it travels will represent the intensity of the sound which reaches the ground in all directions. For an observer standing at the pink bullseye, the approximate sound event will be played through your speakers. The sound level for this observer will also be graphed on the left with a moving bar representing the current moment in time. For an observer located at the pink bullseye, the aircraft sound level gradually rose, reached a maximum, and then gradually fell. The level of the sound when it was loudest is known as the LMAX. LMAX is expressed in decibels.
Oops.
The following video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft. The following video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft noise metric number of events above, also known as NA. On the right, 3 separate aircraft will be shown consecutively taking off and beginning their flights. The multicolored bubbles surrounding the aircraft as they travel will represent the intensity of the sound which reaches the ground in all directions. For an observer standing at the pink bullseye, the approximate sound events will be played through your speakers. The sound level for this observer will also be graphed on the left with a moving bar representing the current moment in time. of events above noise metric is commonly referred to as NA. For example, the threshold is 70 decibels. This is referred to as number of events above 70, or NA 70. Over a specific period of time, the number of aircraft events which have an Lmax that meets or exceeds the NA 70 threshold are counted towards the number of events above. Out of 3 aircraft events reached 70 decibels, the number of events above 70 in this example is 2. The following video sequence will demonstrate the aircraft noise metric, sound exposure level, also known as SEL. On the right, an aircraft will be shown taking off and beginning its flight. The multicolored bubbles surrounding the aircraft as it travels will represent the intensity of the sound which reaches the ground in all directions. For an observer standing at the pink bullseye, the approximate sound event will be played through your speakers. The sound level for this observer will also be graphed on the left with a moving bar representing the current moment in time. From the beginning of the sound event until the end, a certain amount of sound energy is transferred from the aircraft to the observer. Total energy transfer depends both on how long the event lasts and how loud the event is. The sound energy exposure as experienced by an observer is quantified by the noise metric SEL. SEL can be thought of as the sound level in decibels, which would be heard if all the sound energy were compressed into an event lasting exactly 1 second. The following video sequence will
So can anybody put the human layman's terms to what she just said there? The sound event level, sound exposure level, I'm sorry. What does that mean in real life? To normal people. Here you are, airport manager, you're standing in front of a crowd of people and you're trying to explain sound exposure level because it's part of your master plan. And you're trying to do mitigation strategies that put people's minds at ease as we build this new runway. So I'm sitting here in Lakeland, and right outside my window, you actually can't exactly see it outside my window because the Saturn rocket is outside my window. You actually have to crane your neck and look down the street next to me. But they're redoing the pavement there. They're strengthening it. It was 3 inches of overlay, and now they're putting down 9 inches of overlay because there's a huge Amazon MRO going in across the runway from us. You guys know what an MRO is, right? Maintenance and repair operation. And so they're actually doing a sorting distribution too. So all the Amazon planes are going to fly into Lakeland. Not all of them. A bunch of them fly into Kentucky. But a lot of the Amazon planes fly into here. They offload the cargo. The cargo goes into this sorting facility. It sorts it all out. They put it back on airplanes. They fly to other places in the country. Okay. So you're sitting in the meeting. This actually happened a few weeks ago, in fact. You're sitting in the meeting. Right now, there's a $27 million project going on there at the airport. You got all the people there that are waiting to hear the terms of the master plan. What does it mean in the master plan for all this construction and everything else? You know Amazon's going to be flying 767s in. How do you explain things like sound exposure level, which is in the master plan, and what the airport is doing to try and adapt to it? I mean, so sound exposure level, what they've done, it's an FAA metric that they require you to do, and it's condensing all of that sound into a maximum level that happens for a second. Okay, so all the sound that happens during the bell curve condensed into a second. All right, so does anybody have their laptop there? So look up decibel levels of comparison items. So it should be something like airplane compared to motorcycle dB level. Anything?
You're wanting numbers?
Uh-huh.
I got a bunch of different planes. Oh, okay. Okay. The highest one I got was the jet takeoff, and its decibels was 150.
Is it,
And the low,
does it say what kind of plane it is?
no.
Okay, well, try and find one that has specific planes. Just because what we're going to do is we're going to do the forecast.
Here's a Boeing 707 or a DC-8
Okay.
at 100.
At 100. 100 decibels. Okay.
And then, what do you want to compare it to? Breathing?
How about a lawnmower?
How about an AC unit?
Okay. What's
Okay.
an AC unit?
60.
60. Okay, so the AC unit, if you notice, the AC unit actually falls right underneath what we think would be a sound disturbance, which is 65. And it runs all the time. How about, can you find one with a motorcycle or anything like that?
It's like a passenger car at 65 miles an hour. That's at 70 decibels.
That's interesting, isn't it? It tells you something about sound propagation, but it also tells you why, as a cumulative effect, a highway is loud, right? You know, if you're sitting on highway traffic, it's loud because you end up having the cumulative effect of all that noise trying to occupy the same space. Remember, it's fluid dynamics, can't necessarily occupy the same space. Doesn't mean that it exponentially increases. It just means that it is an increase.
I found a lawnmower and a motorcycle.
Okay.
Okay. They're both 100 also.
Well, and it depends on what neighborhood you live in with that motorcycle, whether it's actually 100 or more like 135. You know, I live next to a guy that has the bumper sticker that says loud pipes save lives. I don't think that's true. I think loud pipes just tell me that you came in at 3 a.m. Lawnmower around 100. So it is uncomfortable to mow the yard without some kind of ear protection. It probably isn't going to cause permanent damage, but it is uncomfortable. So you can kind of get a notion there. And as you're sitting there trying to talk to your public when you're doing a big project, you're trying to adopt your master plan, or you're talking about your part 159 plan, it helps to have some of those comparisons, because people can say, okay, yeah, it bothers me to mow the grass at 100, but if you look, we're only going to have, with the 767, they're going to have 13 operations a day. How's an operation defined? That's the first thing you've got to do. An operation is either a takeoff or a landing. So you might actually say we're only going to have 6 flights per day, or 6.5. And they'll say, can you only have 6.5? Well, one of those planes lands at 10 o'clock, but it's not ready to fly out until the next morning at 8. But anyhow, so we're going to have 6 flights per day by each aircraft, they take off and they landing, or 12, in our case, 13 operations per day. Of the 767, do you have a dB level for the 767 third gen?
No, but I might be able to find it.
If you look up the dB level for the 737 MAX, you're not going to find anything either, because they're all just sitting somewhere.
What did you want? The 767?
Yeah, 767, and then it probably gives you differentiation whether it's second gen or third gen. You can just say 767. That'll be fine.
Google is not making it very easy on me for this one.
That's not Google's job, is it? Oh, yeah, it is. Wait. Hey Alexa, how many dBs is a 767?
Oh, that's my guy. Yeah, I've not seen it anywhere.
There's a book. Um, there's a book where you can find all these. It's called something. Obviously, because it's a book, it has a name. It's actually called Annoyance Caused by Aircraft en Route. So this en route is obviously different from, en route is different from takeoff. So when we're working with them, it's ordinarily it's going to be on takeoff. But you can tell the difference that the changing in engines has made because it at one time the 707 was sort of the standard, and it was somewhere in the 115 120 decibel range, and now you're seeing like 767s and so forth. You're seeing those really somewhere just above 100 range, 110 115. So it is a significantly lower amount. The 757, for instance, at 37,000 feet can still generate as much as 80 decibels. So it really is very dependent on the aircraft itself and what generation engine it's actually running. So there was a 2018 article that here I'm going to share this with you guys. Shows the gosh darn, that actually shows the sound that is produced by the aircraft at each activity. So you see right here is boarding. Yeah, boarding, not much noise going on. And then you have ascent, cruise, deplaning. And this is the resources that are available are pretty amazing because this is a chart that actually shows folks the environment inside the airplane. So you're looking at your decibel levels as you're flying along, and my suggestion is that when we go on commercial flights, we should all be wearing headphones, right?
Yes.
This is sustained exposure of right around 80 decibels. So you do immediate hearing damage at at about 130 135, but we don't want to do any hearing damage at all if we can avoid it. Okay, well, let's hop over here to make sure I want to cover this ACRP 15. And so we know that we're potentially going to have issues as airport managers. We're going to potentially have issues whenever we do any particular project. And we know also that we're supposed to do how do I phrase this as a question? So we're supposed to do environmental assessments, right? And so one of those items that we're supposed to consider is noise. The FAA considers noise to be the most important environmental issue for airports. Okay, so we're trying to be good community partners. How do we do that? What are the primary things that we would want to do in order to be good neighbors as we're considering the issue of noise on the airport? First, we hire a really good PR person like Melissa.
What?
And when we have the Canadians come by, we put out a slogan like, "That's the sound of freedom, eh?" That still cracks me up. So I had a chance to do an airport conference at Salina when the Canadians were out there, and that was a good group of folk. But they were loud, and they operated a little bit at night too. The great part, though, is that in terms of doing your master plan evaluation, they probably didn't operate enough that it was going to make even a blip in your 65 DNL level. Anyhow, so what else do we need to do besides hiring Melissa? What else do we need to do to be good neighbors?
Listen to complaints.
Listen, and it's not even necessarily complaints, but we listen. We build trust through good two-way communication. One of the things that the ACRP advocates for is that our leadership at the airport is out in front. I have seen it before where, not in Kansas, but in other places where they were doing a relatively impactful community outreach, and there was nobody from the leadership there. It was really basically just the technicians who had done the underlying work, and that went over about like a lead balloon. In the research that underlies this ACRP, one of the conclusions that they ran into was that when you ask for the goals, mission, vision of organizations, both the airport and the community groups that would usually form against airport expansion or whatever, those community groups would most often say that their goal was to have cooperation, communication, and an open discussion and partnership with the airport, which is not the impression that most airport managers had. I mean, they frequently felt like it was an us against them type of situation. And so part of the thought process there is that you have to change the thought process and understand that what we're doing is building good communication. We get our senior leadership out in front. We use all kinds of graphics to illustrate the message of what's happening as a result of the airport process. And, make sure that there's a transparent process and select staff that have good people skills when you're conducting your public workshop. So once you move from that, okay, we've got the right notion going forward, then we need to understand all those terms that I just helped define for you, which I know nobody's going to really retain, except for maybe through the quiz tonight, and then you're going to forget about it entirely unless you write your paper on it. But I would suggest you can come back once you're out in the field and you can look at this workbook and get a little bit of an understanding for what each of those levels mean, the day-night sound level. So it's a metric used by airports to communicate noise exposure patterns. Okay, what does that really mean? Well, it means that we're looking for numbers that exceed the noise that might be produced by a lawnmower. Of course, you don't expect your neighbor to be mowing their grass in the middle of the night, unless, like one of my friends said, the reason she mows her grass in the middle of the night is so that her neighbors won't talk to her. Aluminum foil goes a long way too, as a hat. Anyhow, so what we're looking for is events that might disrupt sleep. We're looking for events, especially on the night level. That's why we multiply it by 10. And so when we come up with that day-night level, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a subjective measure to apply to noise events. That sound exposure level is another subjective measure. So it's the potential effect of airport noise on sleep disturbance and disruption of learning. So the two factors that we're really looking for at SEL is if it would wake you up in the middle of the night, and if our target is over the top of a school, are we disrupting the learning that's going on in the school? The reason we do number of events above. So that's the selected sound level that's above so many decibels. And it's identified so that it's a meaningful metric to understand the components of existing noise. How many flights are going over? When I say that Amazon's going to have 6.5 flights or 13 operations per day, that is a number of events standard. And depending on the direction of the wind, and when you're planning these things out ahead of time, you use the wind data that's available, you use the other factors that are available. What is our primary runway? Up to what level will we go ahead and have these people use the primary runway? Where do we put that bullseye so that we know the number of events above? One of the things they did here is that bullseye sits over a commercial corridor. It's County Line Road. And on County Line Road, the crane is the national bird of County Line Road. And it's not the kind of crane, the sandhill crane that cries out in the middle of the night and you think a dachshund is being stabbed. It's the kind of crane that builds logistics facilities. So the bullseye is right in the middle of a 4-lane thoroughfare that includes a huge grocery distribution center, a Amazon fulfillment center, probably 400,000 or 500,000 square feet of warehousing. How ideal is that to be the location where we have that time above piece? It's absolutely ideal because most of our loud events are occurring over an area that is compatible because it's noisy too. You know, they got trucks hooking up and pulling apart and all kinds of beeping all day and night. It is compatible with airport noise or with louder noises. So it's ideal. The next part that we can do, that we can put the public at ease, the things that we can manipulate, massage, help the public understand, because we are the experts in this portion. The flight track. Where are the planes most likely to come from that are landing on runway? In this case, it'll be runway 10 when it reopens. It's 9 right now. Where are they coming from? Well, they're coming mostly from the west, obviously, but they're coming over areas that are largely undeveloped. We understand the flight tracks. Now, what can we do to adjust those things? So even at small airports, the Pleasanton Airport in Kansas that probably sees, 8-10 operations a week, we changed the pattern so that the pattern would actually fly, instead of over a neighborhood, the pattern would fly over 69 highway. How does that help? Well, so we know that there were 220 or 225 dump trucks that drove along the road that forms the southern boundary of that airport to a gravel plant. We put noise where noise is. So the most of the time on target for the noise is actually in an area that is already noisy. And we can change flight tracks if we need to. It takes some effort, especially when we're talking about en route or we're talking about procedures, stars, or departure procedures. It takes time, but if we see an issue starting to develop, particularly into our larger airports where we are getting that repeated noise pattern, then it is possible for us to turn to the FAA and say, hey, look, we need to change that procedure. It's working for you in terms of traffic management. It's not working for the people on the ground. And the FAA is sensitive to that. Like I said, noise is what they consider the biggest environmental issue. The other thing we can do, we have a relatively larger airport, we can establish voluntary runway use programs that maximize weather or activity that would put the aircraft over areas of compatible land use. So we put that airplane over an industrial park, if it's calm winds, if it's relatively calm winds, and up to a certain level, especially for larger aircraft that can handle a little stronger winds. We can also abate the noise. For instance, at Olathe Johnson County, I think the instruction is climb to 16 or 1800 feet before executing any turns. So even if you're cleared on course by the tower, you know as a pilot that the noise abatement procedure is I climb on runway heading until I reach 1800 feet. Then I turn on course even though I've been cleared on course. And that helps keep the noise out of the neighborhoods. That area is particularly bad because it's been developing. And so you have, if you don't stay on runway heading, I think the airport owns to the next mile. It's either airport or parkland for the next mile to the south. If you stay, if you'll just keep climbing until you get to that next mile, then you have mitigated the issue that you're going to create with the $1 million houses to the left and the $400,000 houses to the right. The people that move next to an airport realize they moved next to an airport and are still going to complain. So there are other things you can do. So we've talked about lengthening the runway. That actually has some potential to get the aircraft up and out of the area. We've changed our flight courses. We can also acquire property like Johnson County did to reduce the number of incompatible uses. So if all you have there is parkland and property owned by the airport, then you're not, for the most part, you're not annoying anyone. Noise annoyance. We can also do insulation. That's why you probably are doing a 159 program, because that allows you to use your federal money to insulate schools, nursing homes, and other facilities that already exist within the areas that have higher noise levels. So your 70 dB, 80 dB area, you can go ahead and you can put insulation in those houses. You can also do noise overlay zoning. We talked about that. You can put restrictions and covenants in the property that say, hey, we know that we're in a subdivision that's underneath an airport. I mean, that's how much clearer does it get than that? And probably the most important thing, and this is really hard to convey to airport managers, because they may either not be a part of the city or they may not have really regular dealings with other parts of the city. I'm sorry, I've been saying 159. It's actually part 150. I don't know what my problem is tonight, but I couldn't come back to part 150. 150 is the program, voluntary program that allows you to get money to do these mitigation features. You get to a new city, you're getting involved there. You're just an ops person, or you're just a planning person. Getting to know the local planners, the people over in the city or the county that do the planning for the airport, is incredibly important. The people at the airport here complain a little bit about there's a tree person, an arborist, and the city has pretty strict regulations in terms of arboretum, that arb thing. It's not Ann Arbor. Anyhow, am I by myself again? Anyhow, so they have really strict tree regulations, and then they have really strict wetlands regulations here, as you might suspect. Well, so getting to know those people and understanding exactly what they're aiming for can allow you to, instead of at a public hearing where they say, you haven't met those criteria, you would already be aware of them and you have a good working relationship. So when they see something's coming through, they call you instead of calling you out. So that's really helpful, and especially if you can create a good relationship with the planner, they may actually say, hey, look, we just got a set of plans submitted, and they're talking about building another warehouse. So it would probably be a good idea if you came to this public hearing and you advocated for it, because that's compatible with what you're doing. Or you need to look at the height issues or something like that, and that'll help you and you'll be ahead of the curve when you're dealing with those issues, so you're not reacting. So when we talk about our community engagement program, and particularly when we're talking about noise is all encompassing. And so you're going to, so everything we do, you're going to have a noise component to it. So part of what we need to do is we need to make sure that we communicate our goals and we understand our goals and objectives when we go into a noise either a Part 150 situation, or we go into a project or expansion that has a noise component to it, or we're doing our master plan or our master plan updates. We make sure that we understand and define our measures of success. There are a number of communities that they started to define their measures of success, and they changed their program of how they were going about doing noise compliance. They wanted to bring, so for instance, there's a community down in the Miami area. They were really concerned about the DNL level. And so they were doing a number of things to try and adjust the DNL level. Well, it turns out that there were easier ways to get there than what they were doing. So once they had that as a defined metric, okay, so how do we change the DNL level? Then they changed their strategy. And part of that meant reducing additional redevelopment of that area. There was an area that was gentrifying. And so development, once you put development money into the area, the desire to retain that value is very high. So working with the local codes department and so forth, so that they could both acquire property and they could also make it more difficult for investment in that area, led to them being able to achieve their goals because they put them into a measurable metric, which is what a metric is measurable. So there are a few techniques that you can employ in order to most successfully reach out and engage your communities. One of the first ones, and it sounds easy, but sometimes is a little more difficult than it sounds, is have a community service oriented commitment. So that is, again, that understanding exactly why we're doing the project that we're doing. Why would you do a project to bring Amazon to your airport? Well, so without that project, without all the improvements, without the 767s, that's about 1,000 fewer jobs in the community. Back when unemployment was a little higher, it was really easy to argue the jobs argument. It's a little more difficult now, because unemployment almost everywhere is next to nothing. And so bringing new community jobs in is a little difficult. The nice part is that the pay rate, especially in the aviation industry, is a little higher than others. So you can use real economic numbers in order to talk about the goals of the airport. And the other, the big piece that for a lot of airports, that what communities want is they want the airport to be self-sustainable. So the airport is paying for itself. We're not subsidizing rich people's hobbies, which I've rarely found that to be the actual case, even in very small communities, because people don't necessarily understand how airports work. Just finished a economic impact study up in Nebraska, and hardly anybody knew that there was a clinic out of Lincoln that was flying to 40 communities and doing they were doing heart clinics at each of those communities. So in other words, you'd have your surgery in Lincoln, and then you'd go back home, and then you'd see your heart specialist, and all your follow-up would actually be in your own hometown. That's not to accommodate the rich people. That is to keep people in their communities longer and to actually service the community. So orienting the projects towards things that are good for the community goes a long way. Progressive community strategies is important too. So having new technology and reaching out to people, I mean, it can be a double-sided sword, especially when somebody invents a button they can push to complain about the airport. I'm still really having a hard time with that. One of the things that's really difficult for us as airport managers is because what happens is that it takes us a really long time to get airport projects through. We may have started planning for this runway expansion 5, 10, 15 years ago, and then all of a sudden people show up and it's like, oh, you're derailing my whole life. And so it's really hard to have that open-minded, okay, we're having a communication, we're having a conversation, I should say. A lot of people come into the airport workshops thinking this is a done deal. Nobody here listened to me. And that's why they start fighting it, and particularly fighting it from an environmental side, because the environmental legislation gives a private attorney action, which means private attorney general action, which means that anybody can sue to force you to follow the FAA regulations. It gives individuals a whole lot of power to stop your projects. And there's nothing worse than if you had spent 15 years for it and then you give the impression this is a done deal, and then somebody sues you because you gave the impression it was a done deal. You didn't actually respond to comments during the public sessions. Then all of a sudden that 15 years goes completely down the drain. So while it's difficult for us to accept Johnny comes lately to object to my huge project that's going to be the pinnacle of my career, win me all kinds of awards and make me millions of dollars. Oh, forget that last part because it never happens as an airport manager. Anyhow, the legacy of my career, come in and object to it. So it's very difficult for us to accept that. But at the same time, it's incredibly important because there's nothing that will get someone to call their attorney faster than if you're condescending or if you're stubbornly holding to the notion that this is a done deal and we're just moving forward. Because even after the FAA funds the thing, I've seen projects where the FAA funding was relatively in the bank, and then there was a relatively big community outcry that put the absolute brakes on the project. I mean, the FAA can't completely back away from projects like that, but if it is not in final funding, then they may insist that you take additional steps. And if somebody is nitpicking how you've done the process, then it's possible they're going to find something that went wrong along the process. The third strategy, establishing continuous proactive engagement. So remember our food truck from Chicago? Remember the flyers you did last week? Remember the how you comply with the ISO 1401? All of those things are potentially proactive engagement strategies. In the handbook here, you're going to find some stuff in the back, or the CD-ROM version, which just cracks me up because I'm not sure. Do you guys know what a CD-ROM is? Well, okay.
Oh, they're all shaking their heads no.
So basically, when these books came out, and it's not even that long ago, I think this one's 2010 or something like that. So I guess it's almost 10 years. Dang, man, time flies. They came out with these CDs that were stuck in the back, and that's how you would get the information. Now you can just download the whole thing from the internet, so you don't got to worry about it. But there are a number of programs in there that talk about teaching kids early at airports what sound is. Honestly, what they're doing, it's good indoctrination, and I absolutely preach it and pledge it. But the sooner you can start talking about your message and the positives that are involved with airports and airport operations, the better. And so they actually have drawing sheets and so forth. I was at Chicago O'Hare the other day, and they have a kids area where there's a drawing, and it's actually a really pretty cool kids area, drawing, and then there's, it's propaganda material. It says, what your airport does for you, and it talks about the benefits of an airport. Well, they're not dumb. These kids are already traveling, and they need to understand the importance of airports, because where do we depend upon our funding to come from? Well, a huge chunk of it obviously is self-sustaining by the traveling public, but we still depend on the FAA and the general fund in some regards, or at least the fuel distribution and or the ability to pass PFCs. We depend on those things in order to maintain our financial security, to have jobs in the future. So they're not dumb. They're getting the message out there early. If you look at the noise toolkit and you download the CD-ROM, you'll notice that Atlanta has a flyer for kids that talks about what Atlanta's trying to do for the environment. And that may be even better now than it was when this book originally came out. That's engaging the public in how you're trying to become a zero waste organization, or how you're using electric vehicles, or how you're using renewable energy, or how you're reducing the amount of carbon created by aircraft that are sitting at the gates by using ground power units that are electrically generated, as opposed to having them run their engines. there are things that you can do that you put into those publications and you educate, and maybe a little bit of indoctrinate. We're supposed to be 700,000 pilots short and 700,000 maintainers short of expectations here in the next few years. For you guys' sake, I hope we're at least 4 people short of airport management jobs in the next few years. And we need people to fill those jobs. So thinking about a career in aviation is a good thing. Strategy 4 kind of cracks me up, but it is absolutely the case with a whole lot of people that I've worked with in the aviation industry over the years. I've literally been asked to come to public hearings because I'm a good listener. It's an acquired skill. You sit there and you listen and you don't react, and then you take all the information in, you repeat it back to the people, you actively listen through the issues that they have, and then you sincerely communicate, I understand your issue, or, we're looking at that issue, and, when we have better, a better grasp of it, we'll get back to you, or any number of things like that. Actively listening and not listening to respond is a key public component, especially when you're doing an outreach like a noise outreach. I was thinking that it was Pleasanton again. I was sitting at their planning and zoning meeting when the airport was approved, and a woman stood up and repeated. The funny part was that she was repeating things that I had supposedly said. And so that's the hardest part, is that you're hearing back things that you supposedly said and you never said, but then responding to them in a way that is non-critical is super important. And one of the interesting things that she said was that she'd been involved with the Part 150 study before, and that we were doing X, Y, and Z wrong, and we admitted we were doing it wrong. Well, of course, Part 150 is a voluntary program, so okay. And then and then logically responding to those things. Not Pleasanton, but it was just outside of Dodge City, Montezuma. Montezuma, we had a public hearing where we had Montezuma's. I don't know. Montezuma's got anybody from Montezuma out there? Anybody from out that way? Yeah, where are you from?
Ulysses.
Ulysses. Okay, well that's way short of Montezuma. Heck, it's an hour flight from Montezuma to Ulysses. Anyhow, but you've driven through Montezuma. So what? Yep. 300 people? 400?
Even.
We had 125 people show up to the public meeting, and they presented me with petitions trying to stop from having their project there at Montezuma. I still don't really know why they were in favor of having the airport there. So anyhow, we went back a year later for the groundbreaking. The sentiment had died a little bit. We went back 2 years later, and they had collected 3 new businesses around the airport. And part of what they found is that the airport primary purpose, so they had a new crop duster, which that was important. But primarily they were having parts flown in from other places to repair agricultural equipment. And one of the guy who actually presented me with the petitions 2 years later came up to me and said, you know what, I am so glad you didn't listen to me. I was like, no, I listened to you. I just chose a different outcome than you wanted us to choose. But they had, they saw the value of the airport, but they didn't see it until the pavement was actually there. We went from a grass field to I think it was 4,000 feet paved. And they ended up seeing what they're primarily concerned with was the 10% match for the grant. And they ended up seeing their gas sales go up exponentially, and then they ended up seeing a lot of business out of it. And so it didn't end up costing the city really anything in the long run, because the state provided 90% of the money. I mean, nothing quite like getting a gift. But anyhow, so they, so the opinion of that all changed, and that was good. And so we did listen, and but again, like I said, the outcome was a little different than what he had wanted. And then another one of these very difficult pieces, and you're going to have to hold your consultants accountable for this, is that you need to develop quality rather than a quantity of information. Your consultants will come in and they'll say, we are the experts here. And this is speaking as a former consultant. We're the experts here. We know the right things to present, et cetera, et cetera. BS. you live with these people. You're in the community. You understand what they want to hear. And you understand the level of what they want to hear. And so you may have to at some point go, okay, in real human being language, this is what this really means. You know, this is what the day and night level means. Honestly, Frank, we just don't want to wake you up in the middle of the night. We're trying to figure out ways to do that. This is the best outcomes that we can come up with. The reason that we've put together this plan is that we're really interested in your opinion, and this will have some impact on you, but it also has a big impact on the community, has a big impact on the airport, the community, the area we live in, the job prospects, whether or not your kids can get jobs after school, et cetera, and whether or not they'll still continue to live here. One last strategy is dealing with emotional feelings. So I cannot tell you the number of times that I went to these public hearings and you're turning our airport into a drug running mecca. Seriously? You know, in Wichita, just south of Wichita, we had somebody who testified that the person had tried to land on their roof. And my question, of course, was really, I mean, I don't think they wanted to land on your roof any more than you wanted them to land on your roof. People don't do that. So you will have to deal with the emotional issues, especially if you're talking about eminent domain. We may actually have some eminent domain issues here. Eminent domain is tough, and it's gotten a really bad name because eminent domain, for the purpose of economic development, has been a hot button issue, especially since the New Bedford case, where basically the city was allowed to purchase land in order to sell it to a pharmaceutical company. That's the Supreme Court said, hey, look, as long as there was a legitimate public need, and economic development can be a legitimate public need, that the city can do it. Well, so a lot of people have reacted poorly to that, and I get it. So especially in eminent domain situations, you're going to be put in a situation where it is strong emotional feelings. People will frequently play the emotional card even if there isn't one there. I had a woman in, so it's not Marysville, but oh gosh, north of Lucas. Anyhow, so she said part of what the FAA did is they required this particular airport, maybe it was Marysville, required the airport to obtain a navigation easement, which limited the use of the property. And the FAA would have preferred that they actually get the property in fee simple. In other words, they buy the property outright. And she said, that property's been in our family for 7 generations. We can't bear to part with it. And with a navigation easement, you don't. But she felt like there was going to be some impact on the property. It was very emotional. Well, it turns out that it was not in her family for 7 generations. It was in her husband's family for 7 generations. There wasn't really an emotional attachment there. There was just really a negotiation feature there. How much was that navigation easement really worth? And so you have to harden yourself a little bit to it, but you listen to it and you try and put it into context, and then you deal with it. All right, so let's talk about the quiz for this week. And let me open it. That's not it. So the quiz for this week is really relatively easy. It does require a bit of writing, but only 1 page, because there you are. And it is what in the holy heck? It says, this is a preview of the published quiz, and then there's nothing there. Let's try this again. Why would I have published a quiz with nothing in it? If anybody said I'm incompetent, your grade just went down. Wow, that is awesome. There is absolutely nothing there. All right, let's try this again. So the quiz for this week is an essay question that says in one page, write a summary of any airport's attempts to inform the public about noise issues, how they did it, provide a link, and summarize how effective you think it was. If any of that language does not make sense to you, it's because I just wrote it. Update question. Save. Review. Yeah, it's there now. I don't know what happened. I kind of felt like I did it wrong when I pushed the button save and publish, and it was gray, and then it did it. So I thought, oh, I must have been okay. Clearly I was not. So that's basically all I want you to do. One pager. Find one of the resources. There's good places to look. I've got a whole bunch of videos and other stuff on the modules this week. The articles about Next Gen are out there. The ACRP 15 is on there. There is plenty of information for you guys to write a one pager. Don't forget, most important thing, I wonder what happened to iPad. iPad was there for a while. This is the most important part. You've got to submit your proposed paper project tonight. Okay? By midnight tonight. Proposed paper project. Just because I want to make sure that it's actually an environmental issue. You guys believe you're more than halfway done with this class? Have you guys been doing your quizzes? Hey, well, that's because you guys are the ones that show up to class. It's all those other people that are slackers. Slackers. But you have until the last day. You have to the date that's published to turn all that stuff in. So it's no panic if you're not exactly on top of it, but it's getting close. We've only got 3 weeks left after tonight. Turning your paper projects. Quiz today is not that hard. I just want one page. Just like you're out in the field, you just walked into the office. Boss says, hey, is there any chance you could do a little research for me? I want to find out how. And then you pick the airport, handled their noise issues, what kind of information they put out there, was it effective or not? Okay? Everybody copacetic there? Anybody need anything? More than halfway done. You guys are all juniors, yeah, or seniors?
I'm a senior.
Senior. Are you guys graduating in May?
Yeah.
No, I changed my major, so no.
Wow. What's the plan?
Oh, I was doing, I was in firefighting. I was a firefighter for a while, and then I decided, you know, some bad things are too gross to unsee, so I'm not see that. So, switch to aviation.
What did you say? You said some what?
Some things are just too gross to see in that field.
Well, I spent 15 years as a firefighter EMT.
Yeah.
I lived in small communities across the Midwest, and so if you weren't going to do it, ain't nobody going to do it. You know,
Right.
and I frequently heard that too. You know, why are you going out and doing that stuff? In fact, that's my firewall there.
Okay.
Firefighter 1, 2, fire inspector, fire instructor, whatever. I saw a lot of gross stuff, and I'm still living through it, so I don't blame you.
Have you ever worked in Wichita?
No.
So
I was
like,
always in small towns. So the Kansas City Metro, 2440 as it sweeps out of Kansas City into southern Leavenworth County. Worked a lot of really bad crashes there before they improved the road. It was and then at the Lake of the Ozarks, I was on 54 highway, which again, a lot of bad crashes because they went from 4 lanes to 2 lanes back to 4 lanes. So on a highway that a bunch of people drove drunk. So there you go.
yeah.
Anyhow, okay. So who else has a plan? What's your plan?
Oh, well, my fiance just got a job in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
I'm so sorry.
So now I got to get a job up there.
Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls isn't that bad. Sioux Falls is okay. Yeah, and there's plenty of work there right now.
No, well, that's good at least.
Yep. Okay. Well, are you guys not seniors, the other two of you?
We're juniors.
Yeah, still got another year hanging out in Salina.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy it because, there's nothing quite like going to school in Salina. All right, folks. Well, if you need anything, again, email me or text me. Please have your paper proposed topic turned in tonight. All right? Anything?
I was yawning and I did not hear you.
That's all right. I've had flight students who said before, as they're coming in to land, I can't listen to you and land the plane at the same time.
No, I'm lovely. I'm good.
So yawning is actually a really good excuse as compared to I just don't want to listen to you. All right, folks. We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
See ya.